going to hit the record button, and Jenny and I are just kind of chatting right now while we wait for you to come in, and we'll begin in a couple of minutes so that everyone has a chance to pop in. But while you're coming in, if you got yourself all ready here, pop into the chat what the favorite garment you've ever made. That's like such a hard question, I know. But pop that into the chat if you will. We love to hear from you. So the chat is available to you to chat with us and to put in questions that you might have. We're going to answer at the end of the series, or the end of the session today. So pop that into the question or the chat if you will. Jenny, what's your favorite since we're asking?
I went ahead and typed it in too, but we just had an episode about sort of remembering garments. And one of the questions was, what's a favorite? And when I stop and think about it, I think the garment I'm most proud of, which is one way of thinking of favorite,
Yep.
is the wedding dress I made for myself 34 years ago.
Yeah.
It was, I cut it out without a pattern. I bought the fabric on a whim because I thought it was beautiful. It's not wedding dress fabric. It was a black and silver brocade.
Oh,
And I just had in my head a garment where I'd have it fitted through the hip, and then at the hips I would gather and go down from there. Make my hip, which is my whitest body part, like emphasize that. And it looks like what I had in my head, and it
yeah.
had no business coming out correctly. I was fitting it on my own three-dimensional body inside out and pinning.
Yeah.
And it's, I would wager most people to see it would not think, oh, that's probably your favorite garment. But for me, it was the hubris involved in believing I could do this and do it like a week before I got married. I was still sewing it as the car was pulling up to take me to the wedding site. So
Oh,
I think that's it.
yeah. I love that. I think that makes sense to me because there's like honestly, my favorite garment is usually whatever I just made.
Oh, well, yeah, that's the other easy answer,
Yeah.
right? Because it
Right.
is.
Right. But if I go back and think about the one I'm most proud of, or the one that was sort of my first, like, wow, I just did this, it was probably an old Sew Liberated pattern.
Mhm.
Um, I can't remember the name of it, but I don't even think they have it on their website anymore. And I made it out of this wool that I thrifted or got at a garage sale. It was like scratchy, like herringbone wool. But I did all the buttons and I like finished all the insides and I finished them with pinking shears and then with the zigzag because that's all I
Yeah.
had at the time. And I still own that. And I generally will discard things pretty frequently or donate them generally, move them out of my life. And I don't bring a ton in because I get kind of stressed out if I have too many things. And so the fact that I still have that dress is kind of amazing because it fits me sometimes. Sometimes it doesn't.
What's funny to me is I do not have my wedding dress.
No.
I discarded that relatively quickly. I've never kept a lot of possessions in the
Okay.
early stages of my adulthood. It wasn't until I went to school, graduated, got a grown-up job, which for me was in my 40s, that I started really collecting things. Prior to that, everything had kind of gone away pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice. We'll get started here in a minute, but it's fun to see. Adele says a swing coat with inverted pleats in the back. That sounds like really fun. And Amanda's favorite was a bag, so those useful things. Ginger jeans. Yeah, Kathy, you could be like, I've made jeans, but it's been a long time. And they are definitely a beautiful pattern that I have been thinking about making. Have you ever made the ginger jeans, Jenny?
I have not. I still don't think they come up to my size, but they didn't originally.
Right.
Actually, when I returned to sewing in 2019, it was at an Asheville Frocktails event my daughter invited me to. I had not sewn for a decade. And I won a pattern. And as I walked up to the table, my daughter's like, get me the ginger jeans, because we knew there'd be nothing up there that would fit me. I'm pretty big. And when I got up there, there was a cashmere pattern that was almost my size. It didn't fit me. It was close though. And I got that instead. And she still resents that I didn't get her those ginger jeans. So I probably ought to make them, but for her.
Wait a minute. Can't she make them herself?
She totally could, but I've got to somehow put to bed
Right, right.
this sore point that I didn't get them. And I'm not sure buying the pattern would be enough at this point.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. But then what would she have to hold over your head if you did that?
Oh,
Oh.
so much. There's always something else, right?
Yeah, there is. There is. Gail, let's see. Lisa says two favorites were the woven tees, completely hand sewn in a series of leggings, self-drafted thanks to Cal Patch's instructions. Cal was on the show Monday. That was super fun. That really fit me through all the activities. Gail says, wait, I made a quilted jacket from a comforter from Target. I love it. Christina says, I made the grandpa cardigan from Patterns for Pirates years ago. Oh, I just lost it. When I first started sewing garments, and I wear the heck out of that. I need to make another one because I wore it so much. Very fun. Thank you for sharing. So let's begin in earnest, if you will. I want to again thank you for being here for the Break the Rules of Sewing show. The show was born from a desire for me to explore the different ways that other sewists sew clothing and do it with success and do it with joy and do it with love, right? There are so many different ways to go about it. And I have noticed when I teach sewing classes that often my students get sort of paralyzed by the idea that they're going to do it wrong, they're going to mess it up, they're going to waste their fabric. And they sometimes it's difficult for them to go from where they are to where they want to be because that is this hurdle. And so I wanted to have this conversation. And then also, as sort of the side to this, and something that Jenny's going to be able to relate to me on quite a bit, I decided in January to become a beginner again. I've been a sewer for 20 years and I've been pattern drafting for a long time. I work for Charm Patterns by Gertie. I work doing pattern drafting for her. So like I have a lot of knowledge in this way, right? But I decided I wanted to be a beginner again. And I wanted to learn from somebody new. And so I took Brooksand Camper's skirt skills class course. And I took it because I wanted to see how she went about it that was different than I do. And I wanted to see there are certain ways I wanted to enhance my own practice. Like I wanted to go deeper into what I was doing. I wanted to have a deeper artistry. And I wanted to take a little time. I'm a fire slang, so I can be really fast at things. And I wanted to kind of embrace slowing down. And so I wanted to explore that as well on this show. I wanted to explore the idea of what took you from where you were to where you are, or like how do you get to that next place, whatever that is that you want to be. So I am thrilled to have Jenny on the show today. When I asked Jenny for her bio, she said, and I quote, she's a wife, mother, grandmother, CPA, and artist, living and working in Western North Carolina. She sews too much, reads too little, and eats just the right amount, except when there's jalapeno popcorn in play.
It's 100% true.
What? This is really what has been on my mind since you sent that to me. What is jalapeno popcorn?
Okay, so there's a local company in Asheville, North Carolina called Poppy Popcorn, and they make flavored popcorns. And one of the flavors they do is jalapeno. So it's just regular popcorn, but they put magic jalapeno and maybe cheese, I don't know, dust on it and shake it all up and put it into bags and sell it to you.
Oh.
And the serving size for me should be a couple of handfuls. That's all I can eat. What I eat though each time is a whole bag. So that's a problem because it's really bad for me in that scenario. My stomach is like, nope, this was terrible. And I pay for it, which means I can only have it occasionally. It used to be I'd buy myself one bag a week. Now I'm down to one a month because if I do one a week, I'm just in distress too much because I have no common sense when it comes to jalapeno flavored popcorn from Poppy.
I can understand that. So I have a friend who makes candied jalapenos, and I put them
Ooh.
on everything. I put them on I put them on everything. I'm like on tacos, on
That
just
sounds right.
potatoes. Yeah. So I'm like, I think I would love jalapeno popcorn, and
I
maybe
think you would like it. Yeah,
yeah, I think so too. So Jenny, you have a podcast called The Insomniacs. Am I getting that right?
that is correct.
And you also used to have a podcast called The Punk Frockers, which some of you might know. Um,
Yeah.
Tell us about being a podcaster, a sewist, and a CPA.
um, well, the podcaster is the weird one to me. The CPA I can knock out really quick. I went to college for a political science degree when I was in my 20s, like you're supposed to, not necessarily that degree. Don't recommend it to anyone except people that it's been good for. For me, I didn't want, I don't know why I did it. I did it because my mom and dad wanted me to. That's intergenerational trauma you have to sometimes work out with large student loans. So that was sort of my path into that. But afterwards, I was just a stay-at-home mom and homeschooled my kids until they were 16 and
Oh,
started to go to college. And when they started to go to college, I thought, you know what? I should probably go to college and get a degree I'd actually like to use. And then this is the really important part. I thought, you know, we were, my husband quit a good management job. We moved to the mountains of North Carolina and scavenged for a living. We bought things and sold them on eBay and on Amazon, sold them at flea markets, things like that. We never had enough money. Everything was hard. We were food insecure, rent insecure, housing insecure, car insecure, et cetera. And it was intentional. We had the ability to make that choice because we weren't just stuck there. I had other things I could do, but we decided that this brought us together as a family. This is way more than you wanted to know, but that's kind of the quick path to when my kids went to college. I thought maybe I'll get a degree in something that's consistent and earns money. And I went back to school to become a bookkeeper. And the first course I took, the professor said, oh no, you need to transfer to the 4-year college and get your accounting degree and then be a CPA. And I thought, well, this isn't so bad. I'll give that a go. I got scholarships and some support along the way and
yeah,
did that and haven't looked back. It's been an amazing 15 or so years of that.
yeah.
So I love it, but I absolutely did it for the money.
Right, right.
so so yeah.
We talk about stability, right? Like I can't think of anything that feels more like stable than accounting.
And
I've done bookkeeping in my past as well. So like this is I can't wait to talk more about that. But go ahead.
somebody always wants someone who can do numbers. I also think accounting and the skills associated with it feed right into sewing very easily. I spent a lot of years when I was raising my children doing more quilting than clothing sewing, and it's a really obvious connection. It's all patterns, right? Everything in accounting is patterns and math. Everything in quilting is patterns and math. So to me, they're really analogous skills. If you can do one well, you can probably learn to do the other well. There's just a thing there that works.
Yep.
But the podcasting to me feels like the oddball. I'm a very social person in personal spaces, but I'm also really awkward about it. Like I can go to a meeting of people, a sewing event, to talk to all the sewing people, and I will sit myself at a table as far as I can from the center of it and hope nobody comes over. But if someone does, I will not stop talking. Like I can go forever from there, but I can't take the first step. And podcasting worked the same way. Beverly, my co-host on Punk Frockers, RIP, not Beverly, the podcast.
Right.
She approached me. She just reached out and said, "Hey, I really like the sewing you do, and you seem pretty okay. Want to do a podcast?" And neither of us had ever done it. And I'm like, "Yeah, I got stuff to say. I could be into talking, but I don't think I could do it by myself. So this is perfect." And we started and went for a solid 3 years with no missed episodes, no missed weeks,
Wow.
and then shut it down. We reached a point where Beverly was feeling like that was the end of what she wanted to share through the platform. And I didn't want a new co-host for Punk Rockers. I thought it was ours. It was a thing we made that was just right for us, and that changing that didn't feel right.
Yeah.
But I wasn't necessarily ready to shut up yet. And I reached out to my daughter and said, "You don't do social media at all. Surely you'd like a podcast." And like, I mean, I could get into that. And I'm like, how about if we also talk about the way that we've harmed each other over the years craftily? We could like build in some of the dynamics there that maybe people don't talk about as much. So we've got basically a sewing and intergenerational trauma podcast that we're trying to make work, because there are definitely, we talked a little bit about it earlier, but I think every generation is harmed by the generation that came before them, no matter what the intent is. Like I like to assume all generations have great intent,
Mhm.
but we learn things. There's, nobody in my generation probably would have hit people with belts. People in my mom's generation, that was just a normal thing, and going back further and so on. Like there's just different ways we parent, right? And so no matter how hard you try, you're going to get some pieces of it wrong.
Right.
And I think it's fun, and it's interesting to me. And with my daughter, genuinely, I have not talked to her so often as I do now that we podcast, because we're scheduled every other Thursday. I get 3 hours and dinner with her.
Oh,
And
yeah.
prior to this, I'd see her once a month on the weekends, probably. And we send memes, but it's not the same.
Oh.
So yeah, did that answer any of your question?
Yes, completely.
Okay, good.
I love it. And
I'm
I do want to say before, as a little side note here, I have often thought, so I
sorry.
just fine. I have often thought that, so I have this like weird blend. I always thought, right? Like we always think we're weird, but I have this weird blend of like analytical brain and creative brain. And I find that pattern drafting, in particular, and pattern design, like bring those together in this beautiful way. And I have done bookkeeping, not accountant, but I've done bookkeeping in my past, and I have a head for numbers. I'm a spreadsheet kind of girl, like, all that
Mhm.
stuff. And I think that for me, bringing those two together, and obviously it doesn't have to be that way, but when I listen to your podcast, and I just listened to episode 10 last night when I was driving, and you were talking about spreadsheets and you were talking about tracking all of your things. And I'm like, oh, like I got the shivers, right? So I'm like, I think that marriage is really beautiful. And I love that about it. And I do think it's really fun, I guess, just to say that statement.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I don't think creativity precludes sort of organized pattern sorts of things, right? So
Yeah. So why sewing though? So why did you pick up sewing and why are you
okay.
seamless?
So this is where it gets kind of negative, my story. Like I started sewing because I was a fat teenager, and you know what they didn't sell in stores? Fat teenager clothing. You just couldn't buy it. Like I'd go out, my friends and I, we'd all go shopping at the Limited, which was the hot teen store in the mall in my town. And they went up to a size 15 because it's odd numbers for teenagers, I guess. They'd go up to a size 15. And if I got lucky and the style of the garment was baggy or loose or had lots of gathers or something else, I might be able to squeeze myself into it. Wouldn't look at all like it was supposed to, but I
Mhm.
might be able to get my body into it. And as a consequence, I had a few pairs of very poorly fitting jeans, but that I could squeeze into, and a few tops similar to that, but I could find very little. In addition, I have a double D chest now, but I had breast reduction surgery when I was 20. Like I had a much larger chest at that point. And there was nothing. If I could fit my top, everything else about it was absolutely way oversized compared to the rest of my body. It was just impossible. And so I took to buying, like I'd buy the big gathered skirts with buttons down the front. I could buy two of those and make a skirt for myself out of it. Not, I didn't need two full ones, but you know what I mean? I could make the fabric work or whatever. But mostly what I did was I hit Cloth World, and Cloth World was a place where you could go and buy fabric for 50 cents or $1 a yard. It was pretty inexpensive, even allowing for comparatives to today. It was really cheap. And I'd pick up stuff there. I'd go to the Goodwill and buy sheets, and I'd go home and I'd just lay the fabric out on my floor in the living room, and I'd draw the outline I wanted, and I'd cut it out, and I'd put it on my body and see if I needed to add a dart or something else, so that I could have things that were kind of like what my friends were wearing,
Yeah.
but were going to fit my body as intended. So I
Yeah.
started sort of there.
Mhm.
And then I was one of those fancy teenage moms you hear so much about. And so when I hit that point in my life, I started sewing children's clothing
Mhm.
because it was cheaper to make than it was to buy, which is not the
Mhm.
case today.
Right
But
now.
then it was a great money saver to know that I could do it. And I did, because I came from quilting prior to that. My grandma taught me to quilt when I was like 10. I chain stitched everything. So I would like production sew, which I didn't know was a thing even, but I'd production sew clothing for my daughters and then save money for my family. So it was really, really helpful. And then later on, I started to get mad about how things didn't come in my sizes in the
Mhm.
sewing world either, because there are no patterns, or there were no patterns for me in the 90s. Like there was almost nothing. And what there was, I would have termed grandma clothing. And today I'm a grandma and I'd still call it grandma clothing. Like it's not at all, it's not what I was looking for, right? It wasn't for someone who wanted to get to go to clubs or wanted to be able to do other things with people her own age. Like it just didn't work. And so I got angry about it and started buying fast fashion, because by that time, Torrid and other places that catered to fat bodies showed up.
Yeah.
And then it took me a long time after that to be like, actually, I don't want anything to do with that either. And to come back and start making my own because I wanted exactly what I wanted as a teenager, something that fit me and looked like I wanted it to relative to my peers or my own desires. And the only way to get there is through what I make myself.
Yeah.
I do try to spend a lot of my time advocating for inclusivity in sizing as well, because I think it sucks that people feel left out or left behind.
It does. It does suck. It does suck. My, I would say that when I teach, my students often have a similar story, even when I would maybe look at them and think that their bodies seem more average and they probably don't
Mm-hmm.
have an issue. It's that, and it's not a similar story as in that there's nothing for them, but it's a similar story as in that what they can find doesn't make them feel very good. It
Yeah.
makes them really aware of their belly, makes them really aware that they've got too long of arms or that they, all these different things. And so that was really eye-opening for me as a sewist, a teacher, because that's how I began sewing as well, is I could not find a dress that fit me. I have really large breasts and wide
Yep.
hips. And if I found it to fit my breasts, then I like fitted clothing. And so if I couldn't find anything that would fit my body. And my grandmother was a seamstress. She worked in a factory and then she did wedding dresses and things in the weekends and the nights. And so she sewed my prom dresses and stuff, which was amazing. But she passed away when I was 17. And it wasn't until I was almost 30 that I'm like, found a dress in a thrift store that was handmade. And it was like a polyester, like 1950s polyester house dress, but it fit me so perfectly. And there was so much magic to me around that because I imagined like who was wearing
Yeah.
this dress, whose body was like mine, and she's walking around somewhere. And it was handmade. And so I traced that dress, and that was like my gateway into sewing clothing. And I've never stopped because I have no tolerance anymore for anything that doesn't fit me well. Like not at all. Like after 20 years, I'm like, if it doesn't fit me well, I'm not doing it. I'm not wearing it.
I have more tolerance for it, but it's because I don't always make, like, I know the adjustments for my shoulders and I don't always do them. Like I get really lazy sometimes too, but
Yeah.
that's, we'll talk about that I think a little bit later. That's one of the things I'm trying to change. That's part of how I ended up in Brooks and Camper's skirt skills class, and
Yep.
now I'm in her top skills class, although COVID ate all of that. Like I haven't made any progress, but soon I swear I'm going to be healed and be able to do it.
Yep.
But I ended up in there because I've never owned a skirt that fit my body, like ready to wear, made by me, somebody else making it for me. I've had tailored skirts made for me and they still don't fit. If I put on a pencil skirt, I walk 7 steps and it's turned sideways. Like that's just that's just how it's always worked.
Great.
And that class, oh my God, learning that I had a tilted waist, like a super tilted waist, was really helpful. It was amazing.
Right. That's beautiful. Do you think so? Is Brooks and Camper's course, is that the first time you've done pattern drafting from scratch?
Oh no, I mean I've drafted my own patterns and patterns for others from scratch since I was probably 16.
Oh, okay. All right. So
Um,
before her
yeah,
approach to showing like really looking at your body and trying to fine tune it to your exact body.
I've never thought about,
Yeah.
like I haven't thought about the part that the principle that I start with, which is your waist is straight across, your hips are straight across, your boobs are straight across, that there could be any difference to that. Do you know
Right.
what I mean? Like I know that when she has us do the skirt, we are drafting it. The definition of the hip line is that it's parallel to the floor. And so in most buildings that will be straight across. So that works out, right? But as you're doing it, she's allowing for the fact that you may have different curves on your hips. You may have all these other things. The part that had never occurred to me was that my waist was anything other than the tiniest direction around my body close to parallel to the floor. Like that never occurred to me.
Right.
I'd never seen that anywhere else.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's out there, but that was the piece I was missing.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, that was really inspirational in that class. I agree. I
So
like that.
yeah, it was huge. It was a really good class. I recommend it to anyone who can afford to take it.
Mhm.
Um,
So when you are thinking about a project, what is the process that you typically, obviously we have outliers where sometimes you just like go a different way, but what's your typical process for sewing something for yourself?
Most of my projects start at the fabric store. I don't usually pick a thing I want to make and then go find fabric for it. I usually start by finding a fabric and thinking, oh, what could this be? And then trying to figure out what I would want to make it into. So I begin there and buy a length of fabric that is a safe bet for first guess for whatever I've imagined. I take a picture of it. I put the picture in a spreadsheet along with what I think I'm going to make out of it. Now, I may not actually make that thing out of it, but now I know what made me choose to part with my hard-earned dollars. Because whether I pay $5 a yard for it or $50 for a yard for it, I'm not doing it unless I think I know how I'm going to use it. Because not doing it that way for me is the way to have a hoard, like just to have nothing but the treasure of my fabric surrounding me everywhere. And I have an intention to retire out of the country in a few years, and I can't have hordes of fabric. I need to have what I need to make what I need to make. So I start there. The problem is that after that, I bring everything home, I wash it, I dry it, I fold it, I don't iron it. I wash it and dry it and fold it. And then the next time I'm feeling like making something, I'll probably spend a day cutting out 8 garments, and I'll grab the things. I'll see if they still look like that. Is this still a Nullarbor cami dress from Munna and Broad? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's this other thing instead. But whatever it is, I'll make that decision. And I have these sort of, they remind me of the bags we took to the swimming pool when I was a kid. They're like net bags, but they're stiff like a tote bag. They stay in a rectangle shape, but they're made out of something that is sheer like netting. Anyway, I have those, and I put the pattern, the instructions, the thread, all the notions, and my now cut out pattern pieces, which I cut out in the worst way possible. I lay my fabric flat on my bed, which is obviously a very firm surface to do cutting on. Yeah. And I take my giant 12-inch shears, the most nuanced shears you could use, and I cut around them, and I hope I come close enough, because I know whatever it is I do out of this first, I'm going to get it to a critical fit point. I'm going to put it on inside out, and I'm going to pin it to make sure it fits how I want it to after that anyway. So if I've gotten my seam allowances are just a little wobbly, it's going to work out in the end, because I'm not selling these. I mean, except as used clothing, and you get what you get, right? But I'm not selling them in any commercial way. So it's okay. Then I put them in that bag, and here's where it gets really rough, because those bags can sit around for a week or 2 years.
Right.
And when I'm feeling it, when I look at that and I go, oh, I should have made that by now, I just pull it out and I sew it up. Now, if I've changed my mind about what it should be, I'm pretty screwed, because I already cut it out. On the other hand, some of the things I make, I can still make little adjustments. Like I could take what I've cut out and go, you know what? If I make it into this other slightly less full dress, I could probably recut it out of the patterns I already have. And if it hits that point, I probably cut it and then sew it like instantly.
Right.
Like right away, because nothing gets through 2 cuts. The other alternative to that is I'm 5'6", 280 pounds. My daughter's like 5'3" and a lot less than that, probably half of that. Like she can make a lot out of my garments if they don't work out for me. So it works out okay. But that's sort of my path, is usually inspiration to, do I feel like cutting yet? And as soon as I do, it's set in stone, and I get the bags lying around. Now I do only own 8 bags, so I'm not allowed to have more than 8. Like if I want to cut one out, I have to make something that's already in a bag. It's just a rule.
Right. Do you adhere to it?
I do.
Nice.
I do. I have to have some form of managing the chaos,
right?
Because I haven't always. And we moved from a 1,500 square foot house maybe into an 800 square foot apartment, and 1 bedroom. So I don't even have a separate sewing room. Like I've got, my chaos has to be managed along the entryway hallway. Like that's where my stuff lives. So it's gotta survive there. And if it can't survive there, I don't get to keep it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do follow the rules. I like to say I don't make the rules, but I totally make them, and then I follow them. It's just a rule. It's the way it is.
I love that, because I can be sort of like, I'll make a rule, and then like, inner rebellion is like, we're totally not doing that. I don't know what she was thinking. We are not doing that.
I mean, rules about ice cream I break all the time, but but this one I don't practically see how to break it. Like having made the rule, I'm like, this is the rule that lets me be successful and continue to sew.
Right.
If I break the rule, I'm not successful and I can't really continue to sew, because what do I do with the stuff at that point? So
yeah, the consequences are too great. I get that. Yeah. I understand that. So, what is your favorite part of sewing and what do you hate to do?
Okay. I I hate cutting things out, which may be why I do it in such a loosey-goosey way. I I I do not love cutting things out. I honestly I've got a little arthritis in my hands. It's a little bit painful. When I before we moved, I had an 8 foot long, 4 foot wide cutting table with, the roller cutter you could use on and all that. It was just the best cutting table in the world.
Mhm.
And after moving here, I've got a 2 foot by 3 foot cutting table
Mhm.
or my bed. And I
Right.
finally determined the bed made me happier.
Yeah.
So that's what I use now. But I don't enjoy it. I
Yeah.
don't notch things. I don't like my best case scenario is I might stick a little bit of tape on the right side of the fabric if it's hard to tell,
Right.
but that's about it. Really, 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 really hate it. My favorite, I really love just sitting down at a sewing machine and just sewing, just like right on through for hours. That I will never get tired of doing that. I don't like to pin things, so I don't do a lot of pinning. It's
Yeah.
just me and my fingers and hoping I don't get sewn through today. And I haven't been sewn through since we moved here a year ago, so I'm doing pretty good.
Have you been home before?
Oh, I've sewn through myself so many times. I am not what's known as a careful sewist.
Okay, so I have to knock on wood. I've never sewn through my own fingers. I know people have, but like when I,
For
so if,
me, it's always coming in from the left hand side of the needle. It's never on the right hand side, and it's always that I'm trying to push something a little bit more than I should have, and all of a sudden I'm like, well, damn it. And as long as the needle doesn't break inside, and I've never had that happen,
right?
right? And as long as it doesn't seem like I've left any thread in there, it seems to be okay. It can take a little while to heal. I tend to infect more easily than the average bear, but not so bad. Not
Nice.
bad enough that I never do it again.
Right, right. Yeah. You're
I
like,
mean,
that's
apparently my brain is like, I mean, if it happens, it happens, but I try not to. But
right. Yeah,
you know,
right. I do. Hi. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate that very much. Um, how would you say that you break the rules? So you know that this show is called Break the Rules of Sewing, and you sort of mentioned a few just now, like you don't do notches, you do very few pinnings.
so what's funny to me is I don't think of those as breaking the rules. So when it comes to that question of how do you break the rules, I'm like, I don't know that I break rules, but I think it's really just that I'm really loosely goosey about most things. I love the day someone showed me that you can turn up your tension and extend your stitch length in order to gather. I was like, at this point, I am never gathering any other way again. Like the 2 rows of thread, 3 rows of thread for couture. No, why do that? Now, the complaint I hear from folks is that when you do it, it doesn't end up as evenly around as you'd like it to be. I can tell you there are several solutions to that. One is when you start your big circle that you're going to gather, mark
Yeah.
the eighths. Just use a pin to mark the eighths. Now you know when you attach it to whatever you're attaching it to, you know where the eighths are.
Right.
How can that be? I've got a 50-inch waist I'm usually doing. That's a lot of goddamn space, darn space to pull that thing around. Sorry for the explicit warning. It's a lot of space to have to gather around, right? But
Yeah.
even there, even with that, and this is where you get your finger sewn through. So air of caution when you hear it. I
Oh, okay.
I put the bodice on the inside, the gathered part on the outside naturally, because you want to keep it as even as possible. And you're just using fingers on either side of it as you feed it through to keep the gathers even and vertical or horizontal,
Yeah.
perpendicular to the waist, right? So you're just it's not that hard. It's really awesome and it saves so much time. If you're not going to use that method, my other recommended method is you zigzag over dental floss. Make sure it's mint because then you get a minty breath of freshness when you pull the dental floss out. It's just refreshing in the middle of this horrible process you do.
You have just blown my mind. I did not know about either of those things. And I don't
Those are
gather.
both great.
I know, but I've always done the one or two, and then I'm like, I really should do three. Supposed to do
Yeah,
three.
you're supposed to do 3, but no.
Right.
I can't. And I know that Beverly went the opposite way. My former podcast host, she she, I think, taught me the method of raising the tension and the lengthening of stitch length to have it naturally gather. And she's like, yeah, it's just not specific enough. It's not precise enough. And I'm like, I think it is. It's just that you have to add precision with your hands while you're running it through. And that may be a step too far. Everyone should do what they're comfortable with. But for me, oh my God, 3? That's lunacy. I would never.
So how does that tie into, you were mentioning, oh, go ahead. Poor
Sorry about
Jenny,
that.
covering from COVID.
It's so fun.
Oh. So how does that tie into, you were mentioning that one of the reasons that you joined Brooks and Camper's course was to, I don't know the words you use exactly. Maybe I don't have to paraphrase and you can tell us. Why did you choose to do Brooks Hand's course, and how does that tie into what we're just talking about?
Well, I think first off, there are probably 1,000 reasons I chose to do the course. One is that Beverly sold it really hard. Like she was this is the most amazing thing ever. But the other part of it is I've never owned a skirt that fit properly. So I thought that would be really cool. And I'd like to learn some more techniques for improving my sewing,
Mhm.
but I'm going to discard some of them.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot that I did going through the skirts class. I did so I do a lot of testing as well for
Yeah.
patterns. One of the things I do when I do something like that, and when I took the class, is I follow all the rules. Whatever it is we're supposed to do, I'm going to do it the way you tell me to, because I can't test it properly and I can't learn it properly if I'm
Right.
not going to do exactly what you told me to do.
Yep.
And then if I make the garment again, or if I continue to make skirts for myself, I am 100% going to throw away the parts that don't work for me.
Yep.
And a great example of that in the Brooks Ann class, like one of the things you do is you make a mock-up for every skirt you do.
Yeah.
You make a full on mock-up. I do not anymore. What I do is I create an inner lining out of what would be my mock-up, and then I do all of my mocking up on my final garment product. So I sew it together where the lines say they're supposed to be, and then I adjust them if I need to, and I call it a day when it fits well enough, and I'm done with it. So I've already rolled back a lot of what she's taught us into something that's more accessible for me. But things that I have gotten out of that class that I think were really beneficial for me is sort of those finishing techniques, this idea of the inside of your garment being able to look as intentional, at least, as the outside of your garment. I hesitate around messy and finished and things like that, because some of the methods that are very valid, like the one you described using early in your sewing, zigzag and pinking shears, totally acceptable way of completing the inside of your garment. It may or may not meet your definition of messy versus not messy, right?
Right.
Most people will probably agree a bound edge doesn't look messy. They haven't seen my bound edges, but most people would agree it's not a messy thing.
Yeah.
But the method that you use in that original garment is also not a messy thing to me, but I can see where others might, like honestly, me 30 years ago probably would have been like, yeah, that's kind of messy interior finish I have, even though it's actually a valid couture way to do your thing, right?
Yep.
I think I missed the question in the kernel there. I am getting lost a little bit in some of these, and I apologize for that. I'd like to say that's the COVID, but it may just be me.
That was perfect. That was perfect. So we were talking about how you break the rules. And so then I brought it back to Brooks Lake Keeper just because you were saying there's some things that you wanted to elevate, maybe that
Well,
you or shift
okay.
on.
Fair. Okay, I have a note on that because I knew I was going to forget the elevating one. So, yes, and I like that that's Pharrell to the floor. Jean DeCracker has just left a note saying Brooks Ann skirt skills taught me that the waistline isn't always Pharrell to the floor, which I love as my new phrasing for parallel as well. And that was really important. That was really key.
Yeah.
For me to elevate at this point in my own, it really is my interior finishing is what I want to change. And I have made a big change in that since taking Brooks Ann's camp class. I've been French seaming more things in my regular sewing life. I've been binding more things. I've been taking the time to hand stitch down my binding, which I absolutely hate and would have sworn 5 years ago even that I would never, ever, ever do. But I'm doing it really consistently now because it gets me that little bit of edge that I want. Weirdly, I still don't iron, like rarely iron. Like it's a weird space to be in. When I was going through skirts class, I was ironing constantly because you had to. That was part of the class. Now that I'm out of it, I'm like, I mean, if the dart looks like it needs ironing, but otherwise I'm not even ironing my muslin fabric, which I think is illegal, and I'm still ending up in a good
Oh,
place, so it's okay.
I hear the sirens right now coming to your house.
I know, right? Well, it's a hard one. I I like to have the garment finished, which means I want to get to the sewing as quick as I can. So I want to skip all the parts I don't have to. And I don't think it has a big outcome on my garment in the end. Like for me, this, for example, this is a linen rayon that I'm wearing here. And it's never been ironed in its entire life and never will be. And I don't think as a wearable garment, it makes any difference. Like I don't think anybody looks at me when I get up in the morning. It's like, oh man, you can tell she didn't iron that when she sewed it. So I feel like I'm okay. I'm sure Brooks Ann had reasons why that's not true, but that's still how I feel about it.
Yeah.
But if I was going to give a tip, because you'd asked in the questionnaire before the thing for a tip, I was going to give you a tip on how to elevate your sewing. This one took me a long time to figure out, but it's the answer for all future elevations of your sewing. You'll never need another tip. This is the one. I know, right? Look at something you made. What bothers you about it? Learn how to fix that.
Right.
That's all you need. You just find the thing, the one thing, and fix that. For me, the big brain blowing, mind blowing, whatever. The one in Brooks Ann's class that got me was when she said, you're supposed to iron your invisible zippers before you sew them. I will tell you that I now know that is the first instruction in the invisible zipper package itself. I never knew that. I'd never read an instruction on an invisible zipper in my life. She taught me that. That changed everything for me. I hated putting zippers in. Now I'm like, I can put a zipper in if I want because it'll be invisible. Like I know how to do that now. So that was a thing from my sewing that bugged me. I know how to make it better. It'll never bug me again because I know it now. So the new thing that bugs me is I don't like when I'm attaching a skirt to a garment, I don't like the way my seams finish there, no matter how I finish them, whether I'm doing French seams, bound seams, or anything else. So I'm on the search using samples to figure out how to connect those seams so that where I have 4 pieces crossing, I like how it looks.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer yet, but once I get that one done, then I just have to look at my clothes again and say, well, what's pissing me off now? Like what piece of this I don't like? And then I'll figure that one out.
That is profound.
So that's my tip.
That is profound. I am going to, I mean, what a beautiful way to look at like anything in life, right? Like, because we can get caught up in like, I want to fix all these 500 things instead of like, what's bugging you right now? Fix that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's fair and it's achievable is the beautiful part of it. And it's also a path to when you're because you might put something on and be like, I've never liked how that rubbed right there, right? But when you're like, does it bug me enough to fix it? You may say no. And now you don't have a right to be annoyed by how it rubs because you've decided that one's not worth it, right? So it also has that other side of it where you're able to
Except,
where you're able to take it and say, actually, that's when turns out it doesn't bug me, not nearly as much as I thought, and move on.
right. And let go of that judgment that maybe you're feeling because you are supposed to do things a certain way. But if
Yes.
you get to just be like, that actually works really well for me. Not iron
Pick the
anything,
thing that matters.
really well for you.
I don't use interfacing in anything. If I'm going to interface at all, I use self fabric instead of purchased interfacing, but I often don't interface at all because for me, the way I wear my garments, it works out just fine for 99% of things. I'm not a pants person. I might interface more if I had more pants waistbands, but I just don't.
Right. Right. And that's an interesting one to think about when you think about breaking the rules because interfacing feels like, again, the police are going to come if you don't use it because it said to use
I
it.
know. But they don't. And the wild part is it's not actually always necessary. It depends.
Yeah.
And there are some disadvantages, especially since a lot of us these days use iron-in interfacings, which really can, especially when you go to wash them later, cause problems. So you've got to steam them. And who's doing that? Like, who's actually doing that, right? And if you don't, you may find that you end up with things not feeling the way you want, which is where I say self fabric, but sometimes I'm using a muslin or a calico or something else. But I've discovered using a different weight of just regular woven fabric, or regular woven fabric is the only one, but to do that with. But I almost never interface, and it almost never seems necessary. There are a few places where it might. Like I say, I made jeans, I interfaced where it told me to. Like the
Mhm.
first time I made a collar, I put it in there, and now I make a decision based on the fabric I'm using and
Right.
things like that. But it's not as critical as as it would seem. It's an ingredient you could skip.
Right, right. And especially when you consider like you go to the store and there are 7 million choices for
Mhm.
interfacing. So you think it is like vital. And so I love this take on it. I have been teaching for a long time and I sew with knits and I often will have my students reinforce the shoulder. I can't show you my shoulder because my hair is away, but I'll have them reinforce the shoulder seam and I'll have them reinforce the waist seam because for those are important to me because it allows it to stay fitted if it's going to be something
Right.
like a band that might bag out, blah, blah, blah. So I always used clear plastic elastic, which is what I learned how to use from a
Yeah.
pattern 20 years
A
ago.
million years ago. Yeah.
And then I had a student, she's like, I hate the way this feels. Can I just use the selvage or can I just use part of the knit
Mhm.
to go in there? And I'm like,
Of course you can.
I think you can. And now I'm like, like why that didn't occur to me that you could do any of that, I don't know. So now I often have students that will put again, they'll reinforce that shoulder seam with just a little bit of the self fabric or maybe a little bit of really soft lingerie elastic that
Yeah.
just gives you that little support but isn't like uncomfortable and plastic and sticking to your shoulder if it's not
Yeah.
encased just right. So, yeah.
Yeah, just try it. Like you could be wrong, but maybe you aren't. Like you're practical. You can look at what you're doing and think about what's going to feel good. It's okay.
Yeah, it is. And I think that it does hit on what you shared hits on kind of the key to it, right? Is that often doing it as you're shown the first time so that you know what it's trying to behave,
Yeah.
what it's trying to do, and then you can make your educated choice after that. And then and be so free
Yep.
and empowered to make that educated choice because there are lots of ways
Yeah.
to
My younger daughter learned to sew on her own. She didn't want me to teach her. I couldn't teach her anything. She was going to be fine. She learned on her own. And a few years later, she came to visit and said, "Nothing I make fits. Can you help me?" And I said,
Oh,
"Absolutely. Let's go buy a pattern and fabric. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make it exactly how they told us to. And then we're going to figure out what we're going to do differently the second time."
yeah,
And she rolled her eyes and looked frustrated and did exactly what I said. And we talked through the instructions she hadn't understood and how it was these things are supposed to go.
yeah,
And then we talked about what we wanted the results to be next time and started breaking rules. And I stand by that as a way to teach things. Teach someone how to do it the most commonly applied way,
yeah,
and then help them to understand there are lots of other ways to do things. And none of them are necessarily wrong. The result is what you're going for. The path that you use to get there is less relevant.
yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the more, and then that also hits on a hurdle that I often get from my students is, and we actually had on Tuesday, because we had a woman who owns a fabric store come in for the show on Tuesday and talked about somebody asked a question that choosing fabric is their most scary part of sewing at this point, right? Choosing the right fabric,
Yeah.
get them what they want. And it's like comes back to that idea like practicing with what you have, see how it works. And then like, okay, next time I actually don't like how this drapes or how it sticks to my leggings because it's polyester, or I don't like this or that about it and shifting that.
My big sacrilegious one is everybody always talked about Liberty of London's Tana Lawn and how amazing it is. And I ordered so much on the basis of everyone adoring this fabric. And it came in and it feels like the worst garbage fabric to me. I hate it. Like I absolutely cannot stand it. I gave all of it away. And what came to me out of that is that it's not what anyone else thinks of fabric that matters. What it matters is what you think. And Brooksanne taught me the importance of swatching. And so now I do when I order fabrics. Mood is one of my favorite sources. And for every amount of money you spend, you earn a set number of free swatches they will send to you. And so I get swatches every time I order so that I can know what a thing feels like because I'm tired of spending 60 or $70 on a length of fabric that it turns out I would never want to put on my body.
Right. Right.
And And knowing what materials in it doesn't solve for that problem. It's not enough to say it's 100% linen or a linen round blend or whatever. It may still come in and I'll be like, oh, yeah, man, not for me.
Yeah. What do you do with your swatches? Do you keep them in any way? Do they
I
have one?
do. I have a giant box that has swatches and leftovers in it. So swatches that I've already made a decision about, I have a picture of, I know what it is. It's in my spreadsheet, so I can go identify if I've already tried that fabric.
Yeah.
But once I'm done with that, everything goes into my scrap box, which I put together to make new pieces of fabric to cut garments out of.
Nice.
So,
Nice. I have a scrap or a swatches book.
oh, that's brilliant.
I usually discard the things that I don't like, and I'm like, I don't. So I'm really clear because I think that part of successful sewing is what you're saying right here is knowing what you like, embracing what you like, and going with that, with what you
Yeah.
enjoy. Don't sew some kind of a fabric that you don't enjoy wearing because you're not going to like the product.
Yep. I have to remind myself of that all the time because I think that I like, for example, rainbow fabrics, like just bright rainbow colored fabrics. It
Yeah,
turns out I do not like them,
yeah,
but I like to buy them. I could buy them all day, every day, but I don't like to wear them when I've made a garment in them. And that still plagues me at the grocery, no, not grocery store. Where do you go for fabric? Fabric store.
yeah.
Still plagues me when I go to a fabric store. I'll walk in, be looking around, and I'll look down at my cart and I'm like, will I wear any of this? Like, what am I thinking? What is my brain doing for me any favors at all? Or am I going to spend however many hundreds of dollars and come home and have 6 garments worth of fabric that I am not going to wear?
Right,
And
right.
I'm trying to get better at that. I think that's really hard.
It is really hard because you go and you're like, ooh, these are really pretty, and this looks really nice, and I really love that. But then you're like, it isn't something that you would enjoy seeing
Yep,
on your body.
that's exactly it.
Yeah. Jenny, this has been so much fun. I'm so grateful that you've been on the show and that you're sharing your wisdom. And again, I'm going to really embrace your tip that like
Good.
bothering you.
I was worried it was too vague, but I think it's a really important tip.
I think it's bigger than sewing. I think it's beautiful. So I know that there is a lot of conversation happening in the chat, and we could take a few minutes now to see if anybody has any questions that we can answer. And if anyone wants to jump on live, they certainly can.
I did see that somebody asked about a serger. Do you use a serger? And yeah, saying they think a serger is mandatory. This was Christina
Yep.
um, for sewing, and I'd say I do own a serger. I own a serger cover stitch combo machine,
Mhm.
and I used to use it for all of my edge finishing. In fact, often I would do all the edges on a garment I was going to make before I started to sew it.
Mhm.
Um, but the ways that I'm learning to do other ways of finishing seams means that I'm not using it as much. I still use it, but it's not as common. If I'm going to bind the seam anyway, I'm probably not serging it.
Great.
If I'm going to French seam it, I may be serging it. I go back and forth on that. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But for the most part, I think I'm using it more limitedly as I learn new ways to finish seams that I like better.
Yeah. Do you sew with knits often?
I sew with knits sporadically.
Okay. All right. So I
When I
wanted,
do knits, I'm probably doing them a lot. And then all of a sudden I don't do them for 6 months. It just varies. And
yeah.
they are like consistently, I do use them for sewing together my knits. A
Yes.
serger, I mean.
Yep. Yep. So Martha says, I'll rewatch this and I've had to come and go, but can you state the tip in a sentence?
Yes. Hold on and let me get my note back up again because that was my key to being able to do it, right? Was because I had it written down, man. I was super smart about this because I knew my brain box wasn't going to work the way I wanted it to. So my tip, if it was going to be in a sentence, it would be figure out what it is that bothers you in your handmade item and learn not to do that anymore. Learn to fix that. So see what bugs you, focus on fixing that.
Mhm. And that was your tip for elevating your practice, elevating your sewing practice.
Absolutely. I think as people have noted, it works everywhere. Like it's a really good thing. My husband and I went through a rough patch like 27 years ago. And what we got out of that was a decision to at least once a year stop and ask ourselves what we could be doing better, what it is that bothers us about the way that our relationship is and how we could ourselves fix it, not what bugs me about him that he could fix, but what it is
Right,
I could do better. And we
right.
do that every year consistently, at least once a year in a like a formal way to say, what bugs me? How can I make it better about myself?
I love that. I am not currently married, but I used to do what we would call a State of the Union for that kind of
Yeah,
thing. Yeah.
it's smart because it's I don't think it like I hate saying it's just so much work, but it's a plant you have to tend. Like it's a living thing, a relationship that you have to tend, and that's a great way to do it. So
It is.
other
Very,
questions?
very fair. A lot of consensus for Liberty of London.
Score.
Christina says she has a drawer labeled swatches in her sewing room, and it's great. Um, Mood is wonderful. I don't order from Mood very often. I feel like maybe I should check them out more.
I checked them out quite a bit and used to order a little bit, but I got the chance to visit their New York store. And afterwards, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm totally ordering more because I got to walk around and really see
Right.
like everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's less overwhelming online, even though it's pretty overwhelming online.
Right. And so I generally, because too many things is overwhelming for me, I generally tend towards smaller stores where it's a little more curated
Yeah.
and I don't get overwhelmed. So, but I've not been there. I wonder if that would change it. That would be interesting. Let's see. Any other questions? Anyone have anything they want to ask while we have Jenny here with us?
We've got a question. Do you carry your swatches around with you when you shop? I
Oh,
do, in the sense that my spreadsheet is always with me because my phone is a computer. And so I always have access there. But I only occasionally carry a physical swatch around with me when I shop. And it's usually because I'm trying to get some very specific color match, which is probably related to bias tape or buttons or something else like that. I am less generally interested in specific information about my swatch unless I've already picked what I'm making and need specific things.
nice. There's a comment you have here from Christina. I'm loving this and feel like I have found my sewing twin.
I'm glad you embrace the chaos in sewing. It can be so fun.
And then Gail said, I gave myself permission to not agonize over choices when quilt making, selecting fabric, etc. I thought that was breaking a rule at one time, found it was liberating, and now it's my natural part of my process.
That's good.
Mhm. Jenny is a wild child, says Anne.
I'm an accountant. How wild can I be?
I don't know. And let's see, what else do we have here? Do you ever buy an item of clothing just because you want to recreate it and feel guilty about that, asking for a friend?
I never go looking for clothing, so it's less common for me. When I was younger, I absolutely did. There were pieces that I would buy because I wanted them in my size,
Yeah.
and that was the fastest path to it. But I I don't really go in places where clothing's sold, and so I don't think I run across that very often. I do sometimes save screen captures of ads on Instagram or whatever that I'd like to do, but I don't usually buy in that case. I take the screen cap so I can figure out what I already own that might be similar enough that I could have it as a basis. I don't think it's a bad idea necessarily, but it sort of like I think the guilt for me would come in with typically buying fast fashion and not necessarily having a purpose for it.
Yeah.
Like somehow I think that's where my guilt would show up. So I don't know that I would, but I don't know that I'd be opposed either.
Yeah. Jean asks, what is in your spreadsheet? Or,
I have so my spreadsheet, I'm actually moving over to open it now so I can take a look at all the things that are in it. My spreadsheet has, first off, it has a tab per year since 2020 showing what I've made. So what day I made something, what the maximum hip size is, because my podcast has a rule and we don't talk about things below a certain hip size, what the pattern is, who the designer is, where the fabric came from, what kind of fabric it was. So that's fiber content, a description of the fabric, which might be a link to the swatch on another tab, or it might just be something that says yellow and black check, for example, whether the pattern was paid or free, whether it's still in my closet, how many yards of fabric it used, was it a test, what type of garment it was, and what Instagram hashtag was used for it, and any notes. So that's just my makes memorization spreadsheet. Like that's how I know what I've made. And then I have a list of recommended fabric shops, and they tell me who recommended it to me, where the fabric shop is, whether they're online or in person. And then it's got date of last purchase. And if they're also a pattern designer, it notes the sizing that they allow on their patterns. Because I honestly, I don't buy patterns from fabric designers who don't have expanded sizing. That's just a place that I sort of stop. It's got my core measurements. It's got my upcoming orders. So it has a screen cap of every order that I place for fabric or patterns so that I can remove it when it's been received. That's just record keeping for me.
Yeah.
It's got a tab that is, it's got a lot of tabs on it, man. It's got a tab that is just for swatches, where it's got each cell will have the swatch, then the name of it, the link to it, and the cost per yard. And if I bought any, it'd tell me how many yards I have.
Wow.
And then there's one fabric designer where I'm trying to make a garment out of every fabric they design. And so she has her very own tab. So I can note when I've bought the new designs and been able to make something out of them. And that's it.
Oh, that's all, she says. I love it. So there have been all sorts of comments, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
Lisa says, thanks again for this fun noontime talk, and this has been such an extra special one, as Jenny is such a part of my weekly listening. What a treat to be here live. Jean says, you're definitely a CPA based on your spreadsheet. Jen
It's
says,
true.
wow, that spreadsheet sounds amazing. I love how thorough it sounds. Would you mind sharing a screenshot?
So I've got on, I'll have to figure out where it is, and I'll try and link to it from the Insomniacs Instagram location. I do have a template of just the makes one that I put out there. So if somebody wants to record their makes in the way that I do, there's a way to do that via spreadsheet. It does not have all my other tabs because they feel like they're pretty specific to me. I think my recommended fabric shops tab may be in that sample spreadsheet, but the rest of them are sort of specific to me. So I haven't really thought about it. But I'll see if I can come up with a way of sharing some more of it on my Instagram profile.
You know what, Jenny, do you have a website, or do you just social media?
I just have social media, and Patreon is where we're housing everything, but we do have a free membership at Patreon. So there's a way to hop over there and see the links and participate in that community.
Do you want to send me the link to the Patreon? And then when I
Yeah.
do the replay, I can send that link to people, and maybe they could get the access to your spreadsheet there.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. And I like the person who's commenting on my glasses, my wall of glasses.
Wow.
It's just two pieces of felt sewed together with holes in it, so you can put the arms in.
I love it.
Anyway, I'll send you the links to those.
Okay, so the Patreon link, and then I'll put that in the replay that I'll send out later on today. So
it sounds great. Thank you so much. This was fun. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry for the hoarse voice, but I mostly think I stayed on track, kind of, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It was a wonderful conversation, and I want to thank everyone for being here. The replay should be available in an hour or two, depending on how long it takes for that to happen. But Jenny, thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. And again, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Y'all have a great day.
Goodbye.
Bye.